So in my last video, I talked about how divided and how diverse America is. So why even bother with America? Why have an America? And I think the reason to do that is because there are a lot of things that benefit from economy of scale. Territorial defense benefits from economy of scale. I mean, this is what Napoleon proved when he rampaged across Europe and through the Holy Roman Empire, where you had these little micro principalities and everything that proved unable to organize a determined resistance against him, against his centralized French state. And so that question has really been settled by history. You want a large scale, and you want kind of a powerful government to organize defense, territorial defense. And that's really what we need the U.S. government for. That's what we need America for. And for some other things like, foreign policy and, maybe issuing currency and a few other things. Not many. Final court of appeals and a, insurer of last resort. Those are functions that America can perform, that the United States of America can perform for us and can perform better than any local government. But for the vast majority of things that you depend on the government for your roads, for your schools, for your parks, for your, anything, social programs, it's just much better to have it at a local level. And that prevents people from exporting the costs to others and from exploiting others in order to pay for the shit that they want without paying for it themselves. Which leads to parasitism. And that's why progressives want a strong centralized government. They want a strong centralized government so they can export the costs to others, so they can offload the costs to others, and so that they can virtue signal at the expense of others. And that's why we really need to gut the federal government. We want to keep it around for certain purposes, but we really need to gut it for most purposes and devolve most of that power to the local level. Because that's where the power is going to be accountable. And that's where you're going to be able to perform calculation to determine whether what you're doing is actually worth the cost to the people you're doing it for. And the bigger the scale, the harder it is to maintain accountability and the harder it is to perform calculation. And that's why they want to increase the scale, because they don't want accountability. They don't want calculation. They want parasitism, and they want to be able to conceal the costs of parasitism so that they can offload the costs of parasitism onto other people. So we do want to keep the United States of America. We do want to keep America and the American identity, like an umbrella identity. But we also want our own local cultures. We want our own regional cultures. And this is something that you see really well preserved and well developed in Switzerland. You could see it, let's say 500 years ago in England, where you had various regional cultures and regional dialects that were pretty different from one another. And you kind of had an aristocracy that was drawn from these locales, but which had a more English identity, a more, cosmopolitan identity, where they had economic ties to other elites from other areas, and they had social ties, and they had military ties, and they had political ties, and they had, kinship ties to the nobility from other areas. And that's fine. Elites can cooperate between regions and between cultures. And they can do that because they are elites. They are, they can play positive sum games. And they can play positive sum, they can cooperate to make pie. They don't have to argue about who gets how much pie because they can make pie. And that's much less true of lower socioeconomic strata, who are much more reliant on opportunities created for them and services provided for them and infrastructure provided for them by elites that they don't necessarily participate in creating. So if you want to have vertical cooperation between classes and between socioeconomic strata, then there has to be a certain amount of loyalty and reciprocity in a vertical direction. And you can still have horizontal cooperation between elites from various regions. And it's good to have that, but it's profoundly short-sighted to replace all vertical cooperation with horizontal cooperation, because the benefits of diversity and the benefits of integration and the benefits of homogeneity are not as great, the further down the scale you go, and the costs are greater. The costs are relatively higher the further down the scale you go. So you want to preserve both. You want to preserve horizontal relationships and cooperation, and you want to preserve vertical relationships and cooperation. And so you want to have some kind of national identity that the elites can participate in. And you also want to have local identity and local culture that middle class and lower middle class and working class can all participate in locally. And so you want to have both vertical organization and horizontal organization. You want to have vertical cooperation and horizontal cooperation. And this can span not only locations and locales, but also races, and ethnicities. Elites from different races and ethnicities are more able to cooperate with each other profitably than, the ordinary individuals of those groups can, or the, let's say less than ordinary individuals. So you want both. You want horizontal and you want vertical, but to apply the same standard to everybody and to insist that everybody engage in horizontal cooperation and horizontal relationships, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work out. So you got to preserve that. I mentioned in my last video that blacks do have a strong historical claim to being here. And I think that's true. I don't think we need to kick out all the blacks or send them to Africa or whatever. I do think it'd probably be a good idea to open up voluntary compensated repatriation, because there are a lot of blacks who do not like America, do not like American institutions, do not like American culture. And they complain about it a lot, even though it's given them a tremendous amount. Blacks here enjoy a much higher standard of living and many more benefits and opportunities than blacks anywhere else in the world. But they're still kind of at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale and political scale and everything else. So they complain about that, and that's understandable. But if you had this voluntary repatriation available as an option, let's say, just throwing out numbers here, let's say you offer them $20,000 to leave, and you offer them $100,000 to turn in their passport and renounce their citizenship. That's an offer you can extend. And not many people are going to take it up because American citizenship is worth more than that. But, some people might take it up if they find America really unpalatable. And, it's worthwhile having that offer on the table, because anytime somebody starts complaining, you can just point out to them, look, there's 20 grand waiting for you and a ticket down at the airport anytime you want to show up. And so you don't have to stick around and put up with me. You get out of here. You've got options. And by choosing to stick around, you are demonstrating your preference for being here. And demonstrated preferences are always more powerful and more worthwhile than stated preferences. So if they're stating a preference against America but demonstrating a preference for America, and the more profitable we can make it to demonstrate a preference against America for them, and the less costly, we can really use that rhetorical point to kind of shut down a lot of the dishonest critique that comes out, a lot of the dishonest posturing where they just complain as a means of trying to extract benefits. We can say, look, instead of complaining about America, you have an out, you have alternatives. There's a big pile of money waiting for you somewhere else. So, if you're just going to complain, why don't you go claim that money? And it's a good way of shutting down that kind of dishonest statement of preference that doesn't correspond to their demonstrated preferences. And as far as, let's say the Indians, they don't represent a threat to America or to white people in America. The Indians have the highest rate of intermarriage of any ethnic group in America. And so, by and large, they're just going to continue to get absorbed harmlessly into the white population. But they also have their reservations, and they have spaces that are, reserved exclusively for them. And so if some of them want to maintain their cultures and their solidarity or whatever in those spaces, that's fine too. The Indians aren't really an issue. The blacks, they can be an issue, but, there are ways we could improve that a lot. One of those would be opening up voluntary compensated repatriation. And, as far as the immigrants, I mentioned we really have to clamp down on the immigration. We really have to shut off the flow of immigrants, because that is a huge thing that treacherous whites have used to attack normal whites, is to bring in voters, dependent replacement voters, to maintain their demographic hold on power in this country. And we really need to shut that off in order to disempower these progressives, and in order to stop eroding the culture and the identity and the wealth of America, because it does erode the wealth. When you bring in low-skilled immigrants, they're a net fiscal liability. They're not paying for the their taxes aren't paying for the services and the infrastructure that they use and the programs that they use. So they're a net fiscal burden. So we're basically subsidizing these people to come in and shore up a hostile progressive coalition that's trying to destroy us. And we need to stop doing that. We need to see about reversing that as much as possible. But ultimately, we just need to, protect the equal rights of whites and protect the civil rights of whites and protect the free association of whites so that whites can organize on their own and create their own communities and their own businesses and everything else. And, let people kind of self-segregate. And they're already doing that. On a political level, people are definitely self-segregating. There is a great sort underway. People are moving into areas that are politically more compatible with their own individual sensibilities. And the number of counties that voted overwhelmingly for Trump or overwhelmingly for Hillary in the past election is much higher than the number of counties that voted overwhelmingly for one or the other in previous elections. So that sort is well underway, and part of it's probably intentional. Part of it's probably just people moving around randomly in search of jobs or whatever, but they're more likely to stick around if they find a place that's compatible with their values and their sensibilities. And that sort will continue along all the relevant dimensions, not just political, but religious, and ethnic and everything else. And if you just let people associate, they're going to self-segregate to the extent that they feel is beneficial for them, and they're going to integrate also to the extent that they feel is beneficial for them. And so there'll be some segregation and some integration. It's all going to be self-mediated, just people making their own choices, and that's fine. That's great. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. That's what we need to be pursuing. But we need to end the war on whites, and we need to break the power of this anti-white coalition, which is headed up by treacherous whites and by non-white ethnic blocs and by, some others who are involved in that coalition who sometimes pass for whites. I'm not going to go into that in any depth, but as soon as you start figuring out what's going on, you're going to figure out who these people are, who I'm talking about. But all of those factors need to be addressed, and we just need to keep doing what we're doing. We need to keep challenging their narratives. We need to keep challenging their authority, and we need to keep provoking them to crack down on us like they cracked down on us in Charlottesville and elsewhere, and like they're cracking down on us on the internet right now. Because coercion is costly, right? Cooperation is tremendously possible and tremendously profitable. Right now, they don't want to cooperate with us. They don't want to pay us for our cooperation what our cooperation is worth, or what would make it worthwhile for us to cooperate with them. They just want to coerce us. They just want to suppress us, mostly by moral means and propaganda means, and shaming and dishonest language and dishonest attacks, malicious attacks and lies and fraud and everything else. They're trying to coerce us by these feminine means into submission, so that they don't have to pay us for our cooperation, so that they don't have to give us what it would be it would require for us to be willing to cooperate with them. So we just have to keep provoking them and resisting them, so that we can keep them coercing us. And that's going to wake more people up, and it's going to make their malice and their agenda more apparent. And then we're going to be able to resist them finally and to break their power finally. But we just want to keep escalating this conflict so that they have to keep coercing us instead of having our cooperation. Because what they want is our cooperation. They want it at a discount. They don't want to pay the full cost of our cooperation. They want to coerce us into giving them our cooperation for nothing. But we want to deny them that. We want to deny them that cooperation, and we want to force them to coerce us. And if we can keep that up long enough and hard enough, we can really exhaust them, because coercion is costly. It's not profitable. And, we're gonna outlast them, and we're gonna win. We're ultimately gonna prevail. We're gonna have our America. We're still gonna be able to preserve our ethnic identities. We're still gonna be able to preserve our local cultures and our local dialects and our local communities and our local institutions. And, we're going to have everything we want, and we're going to deny them what they want, because what they want is hostile, it is malicious, it is dishonest, it is fraudulent, and it is parasitic. And people are getting fed up. They are having their fill. They have had enough. We have the truth on our side. We have justice on our side, and we will ultimately prevail.